Hello and welcome to this video on New York governors. I was in Albany and I visited the state capitol, and they have this wonderful exhibit called the Hall of Governors. So it goes through all the governors in New York, and I thought I was inspired to make this video. The first New York governor was George Clinton, the father of New York State. He served as governor for 21 years, longer than any chief executive in the state's history. He was a patriot, and he served as a member of the Second Continental Congress that adopted the Declaration of Independence and defended New York as a brigadier general during the Revolutionary War. In 1804, he became the first elected vice president of the United States and served under Presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. John Jay was the second governor. He was a prominent politician, diplomat, and lawyer, a founding father of the United States. He helped to negotiate the end of the Revolutionary War and drafted the New York State Constitution in 1777. He served as president of the Continental Congress and was the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And as governor, he signed into law an act for the gradual abolition of slavery in 1799. The third governor was Morgan Lewis. He was son of a signer of the Declaration of Independence and had a military career as a chief of staff to General Horatio Gates, and served in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. He served in the New York State Assembly and Senate and as a state attorney general and chief justice of the state Supreme Court. In 1797, Albany became the permanent seat of the state government. In 1799, New York's Gradual Abolition Act passes. Children born to slaves after July 4th, 1799 would be freed by 1827, but those already in servitude would remain so for life. In 1801, Hamilton founds the New York Evening Post, and in 1802, the first cadets entered the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, which is now the oldest continuously operating Army post in the country. Robert Fulton's steamboat in 1807, the Claremont makes its inaugural trip up the Hudson River, revolutionizing water travel and world trade. By the way, these significant events in New York history were interwoven in the hall between the displays of the governors. The fourth governor was Daniel D. Tompkins and was elected governor for 4 times. He served in the New York State Assembly and was elected to the United States House of Representatives, but resigned before his term began to accept an appointment to associate the justice of the New York State Supreme Court. He was an effective war governor, credited with defending the western and northern borders of the state during the War of 1812. The fifth governor was John Taylor, and was acting governor for 4 months after Tompkins resigned to serve as vice president. He was a successful businessman from Albany, an agent for the Commissioner of the Indian Affairs, director of the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company, and an Albany County judge. He was elected to the state Senate 11 times, and Taylor served as president of the Senate in 1811. Next, we have John DeWitt Clinton. He's known as the father of the Erie Canal for his leadership in building one of the world's greatest engineering marvels. Initially mocked as Clinton's Ditch, the canal proved to be a monumental success, connecting Lake Erie to the Hudson River and creating a profitable maritime route from New York Harbor to the country's interior. Clinton began his career as a private secretary to his uncle, Governor George Clinton, and he served in numerous political offices and was an enlightened advocate for educational, social, and economic reform. In 1812, the war began between the U.S. and Great Britain, and has fought in 3 fronts in New York: Lake Champlain, Lake Ontario, and the Niagara frontier. In 1813, Americans defeat the British at the Battle of Sackett's Harbor, preserving the most important American shipyard on Lake Ontario. In 1814, American victory at the Battle of Plattsburgh ends Great Britain's invasion of the northern states. In 1817, the New York Stock Exchange is established. In 1825, the Erie Canal links the Hudson River to Lake Erie, greatly expanding trade and securing New York's economic dominance. By the way, when I was there in Albany in July of 2025, they were celebrating the 200th year anniversary of the Erie Canal, and there's events going on there. 1826, James Fenimore Cooper publishes The Last of the Mohicans, and later became one of the most widely read novels of the 19th century. In 1827, New York abolishes slavery. 10,000 slaves are freed, but non-residents were allowed to keep slaves for up to 9 months. The next governor is Joseph C. Yates. He was the first mayor of his birthplace, Schenectady, New York, and was a founding trustee of Union College. His long career in government included service as a New York State Senator and a state Supreme Court justice. In 1822, the United States Senator Martin Van Buren convinced Yates to challenge incumbent Governor DeWitt Clinton. And after a short-lived victory, Yates lost to Clinton, but just 2 years later, and supported Clinton's failed presidential bid in 1812. And Yates County is named in his honor. Martin Van Buren was the 9th governor, and he was the first New Yorker to become president of the United States. One of the most influential political figures of his era, he was a state senator, state attorney general, and a United States senator. During his 12 weeks as governor, Van Buren championed the Safety Fund Act, which provided an early form of deposit insurance. He was President Andrew Jackson's Secretary of State before becoming his vice president and successor. He was nicknamed Old Kinderhook. Van Buren's supporters popularized the phrase "OK" during his unsuccessful re-election campaign in 1840. Enos T. Throp, a farmer and lawyer from Cayuga County, served as state circuit court judge and as a member of the United States House of Representatives. Assuming the duties of governor following Van Buren's resignation, he served out the term and was reelected the following year. During his tenure, he championed legislation to build the state's first insane asylum and ended imprisonment for debtors and led New York's response to a devastating cholera outbreak. In 1833, Jackson appointed him as the naval officer for the Port of New York. William L. Marcy is our 11th governor here and served as a militia lieutenant and later as an adjunct general of New York. As governor, he created the State Geological Survey, the forerunner of the New York State Museum, and Marcy later served as Secretary of War from 1845 to 49 under Polk, and as Secretary of State from 53 to 57 under Pierce. The highest peak of the Adirondack Mountains is named in his honor. In 1827, the first African-American owned and operated newspaper in the country, Freedom's Journal, is published in New York City. In 1830, Joseph Smith of Wayne County publishes the Book of the Mormon and establishes the Church of the Latter-day Saints. In 1831, New York's first railroad, operated by the Mohawk and Hudson Company, opens between Albany and Schenectady. In 1836, Horace Greeley publishes the New York Tribune, and 1839, the La Amistad is seized off the coast of Long Island after Africans on board revolt against their captors, and in that same year, lasting until 1852, the anti-rent farmers movement ends eastern New York's system of tenanted estates. Here is another view of this wonderful Hall of Governors in the Capitol. And our next governor that we'll talk about is William H. Seward. He supported infrastructure improvements, education reform, and prison reform. He refused to return fugitive slaves to the South and was a leading voice for the abolitionism in the United States Senate. Appointed Secretary of State by Lincoln, he helped prevent European countries from recognizing the Confederacy and advised the president on the timing of the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1965, Seward was stabbed by an accomplice of John Wilkes Booth, and after recovering, he negotiated a treaty for the purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867. He was mocked at the time as Seward's Folly. William C. Bouck was the 13th governor and was sheriff of Schoharie County and a member of both the New York State Assembly and Senate. He served on the Erie Canal Commission and earned the nickname White Horse Bouck for the white horse he rode to bring pay to the workers at the canal's western end. He lost the gubernatorial election in 1840 before winning in 1842, and he activated the militia to quell the anti-rent riot in Columbia County. After losing the nomination in 1844, he served on the State Board of Regents and later as an assistant United States Treasurer. Next, we have Silas Wright Jr. He was born in Massachusetts and raised in Vermont. He moved to Sandy Hill, New York after graduating from law school and opened a practice in Canton. And he served as the New York State Senator, State Comptroller, and in both houses of the U.S. Congress, and he declined the vice presidential nomination under Polk in order to run for governorship in 1844. Next, we have John Young, the 15th governor of New York. He supported the expansion of the Erie Canal, established an independent court of appeals, and pardoned tenant farmers who were imprisoned for participating in the anti-rent movement. He was a supporter of Taylor and appointed as Taylor as the Assistant United States Treasurer, which he served from 1849 until his death in 1852. In 1840, the Liberty Party, formed in Warsaw, New York, holds its first national abolitionist convention in Arcade, New York. In 1841, the New York State Fair is held in Syracuse. In 1842, the Croton Aqueduct opens, bringing clean water to the growing New York City population. In 1843, the first grain elevator in the U.S. opens in Buffalo, New York, allowing the port to keep pace with the nation's agricultural trade. In 1844, New York City's Samuel F.B. Morse sends the first telegraph message. In 1845, the onset of Ireland's potato famine prompts an influx of Irish immigrants to the U.S. In 1846, the U.S. annexes Texas, resulting in the Mexican-American War, and New York sends volunteer infantry regiments to California and Mexico. In 1847, the Court of Appeals is created by the New York State Constitution of 1846, and in that same year, former slave Frederick Douglass publishes the abolitionist paper North Star in Rochester, New York. In 1848, the first Women's Rights Convention in the U.S. convenes at Seneca Falls and sets in motion a national transformation of women's rights. The 16th governor, Hamilton Fish, was the son of Revolutionary War Colonel Nicholas Fish, and who served in the United States House of Representatives and was appointed lieutenant governor to John Young. Governor Fish pushed for a legislative endowment for a state agricultural college, revised the state tax laws and criminal code, and improved school systems. Afterwards, he was a United States senator and served as Secretary of State under Grant. His son, grandson, and great-grandson were all named Hamilton Fish and all represented New York in Congress. The 17th governor was Washington Hunt. He served as the first judge of the Niagara County Common Pleas Court, was elected to 3 terms in the United States House of Representatives, and resigned his post as New York State Comptroller to run for governor. He improved roads and sought expansion of the Erie Canal, and he briefly retired and then served as temporary chairman of the Whigs' last national convention in 1856. Horatio Seymour was the 18th governor and was introduced to New York politics when he spent 6 years as Marcy's military secretary. And in his first term, he voted a bill prohibiting the sale of liquor and opposed anti-immigration nativism, and he opposed the federal draft, citing a violation of the state's rights. And during the draft riots of 1863, he sympathized with the rioters and was subsequently defeated for re-election. Myron C. Clark was the 19th governor, and before embarking on his political career, he served as lieutenant colonel in the New York militia. And while serving, he sponsored a law prohibiting alcohol and was vetoed by Seymour. In 1855, he defeated Seymour in the closest gubernatorial election in New York State history by only 309 votes. As governor, Clark signed prohibition into law, but it was overturned 8 months later by the Court of Appeals. In 1850, in Cuyahoga County, native and University of Buffalo founder Millard Fillmore becomes president upon the sudden death of Zachary Taylor. In 1851, the New York Times is founded as the New York Daily Time, selling for just 1 cent per copy. In 1852, industrialist Elisha Graves Otis invents the elevator in Yonkers. In 1855, in Castle Garden, America's first immigration center opens at a former Army fort in New York City. In 1955, working from Long Island, America's poet Walt Whitman self-publishes Leaves of Grass. That same year, the world's first working railroad suspension bridge is built over Niagara Falls by John Augustus Roebling. And the next year, the Western Union Telegraph Company is established in Rochester. 1858, the cornerstone is laid for St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan. John A. King is the 20th governor, fought in the War of 1812 as a cavalry lieutenant, and he was New York's first Republican governor. He advocated for the improvement of schools and voting rights for African Americans. He also completed several public works projects, including the expansion of the Erie Canal, and he was a member of the 1861 Peace Convention that met in Washington, D.C. Next, Edwin D. Morgan was the first and longest-serving chairman of the Republican National Committee, and as governor, he reduced the state debt and enhanced the effectiveness of prisons, insurance companies, and charities. In 1961, he entertained Lincoln at his home on the Albany stop of Lincoln's journey to Washington, D.C., and during the Civil War, Morgan helped raise and equip over 200,000 Union troops and served as Major General of Volunteers and commander of the Department of New York. Reuben E. Fenton is the 22nd governor, and he served in the United States House of Representatives and was a key organizer for New York's Republican Party. He opposed slavery and supported President Abraham Lincoln's policies. As governor, Fenton removed tuition fees for public education, established a professional fire department, and signed a law to define basic housing standards. He also advocated for the welfare of soldiers and authorized relief measures to benefit veterans. The 23rd governor is John T. Hoffman, and he served as mayor of New York City. As governor, he signed legislation to create the American Museum of Natural History and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He ordered protection for marchers during New York City's Orange Riot, which was a violent conflict between Irish Protestants and Catholics, in which more than 60 people were killed. Hoffman's association with the corrupt boss of Tammany Hall political machine, William H. Tweed, hastened the end of his political career. In 1859, in a prelude to the Civil War, John Brown, a resident of Essex County, unsuccessfully attempts to incite a slave insurrection at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. In 1860, Lincoln's speech at New York City's Cooper Union clarifies his views on slavery and propels him to the presidency. In 61, the Civil War begins. Before its end in 1865, New York State would provide more men, material, and money to the Union cause than any other state. In 1862, the USS Monitor, built in New York, battles the Confederate ironclad Merrimack. In 1863, draft riots erupt in New York City, and at least 11 African-American men are lynched and more than 100 civilians killed. In 1864, Elmira Prison Camp opens, ultimately housing more than 12,000 Confederate prisoners. In 1867, ground is broken for the New York State Capitol Building in Albany. In 1869, the American Museum of Natural History opens in New York City. And that same year, Susan B. Anthony of Rochester and Elizabeth C. Cady Stanton of Johnston found the National Woman Suffrage Association. 1870, the New York becomes the 13th state to ratify the 15th Amendment, giving African Americans the right to vote. In 1873, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vow's improved and expanded Central Park is completed in New York City. In 1873, William M. Boss Tweed is convicted for corruption in New York City. John A. Dix is the 24th governor, and he began his military career as a volunteer in the War of 1812 and became the adjutant general of New York by 1830. He was a major general during the Civil War, and he also served as New York Secretary of State, a United States Senator, Secretary of the Treasury, and Minister to France. The oldest man to ever serve as governor, Dix's tenure included the triumph of the completion of the International Bridge over the Niagara River and the tragedy of the financial panic of the Long Depression, which began in 1873. Samuel J. Tilden was the 25th governor. He served as a state assemblyman for more than 25 years and played a prominent role in reorganizing the Democratic Party in the post-Civil War era. Tilden broke up the Canal Ring, a group of politicians who defrauded the state through the maladministration of its canals, and he was the first governor to occupy the present executive mansion in Albany, and he was defeated by Hayes in a hotly disputed presidential election in 1876. Lucius Robinson was the 26th governor of New York, and he was known as the guardian of the economy when he served as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the state assembly. During the Civil War, he served as New York state comptroller, and as governor, Robinson eased the tax burden and paid off the general debt by 1878. Committed to frugality, the only project for which he approved funding was the completion of the legislative and executive chambers in the state capitol. Alonzo B. Cornell was the 27th governor, and he was the son of Ezra Cornell, who founded Cornell University and the Western Union Telegraph Company. In 1873, he was chosen by his colleagues as the Speaker of the State Assembly, one of the few times a first-term member was elected to that role. As governor, Cornell proved to be a great asset to New York, modernizing state finances, creating the State Board of Health and Railroad Commission, and organizing the National Guard into a much more effective force. In 1873, P.T. Barnum's Hippodrome Circus, the greatest show on earth, debuts in New York City. In 1874, the first Chautauqua Assembly meets and launches a national adult education movement. In 1879, Frank W. Woolworth opens his first five and dime store in Utica, New York. And in that same year, New York State Assembly chamber opens to the Capitol, Senate, and executive chambers opens 2 years later. In 1881, New York City lawyer and Republican Party leader Chester Alan Arthur becomes president upon the assassination of Garfield. In 1882, in Lower Manhattan, Thomas Edison flips the switch on the world's largest central power station, powering 59 customers. In 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge is completed, spanning the East River as the longest suspension bridge in the world. Grover Cleveland was the 28th governor, and he began his illustrious political career as sheriff and then mayor of Buffalo, where his leadership helped to propel him to the governorship. In Albany, he championed the public interest and favored a strong civil service law over patronage. A rising national figure, Cleveland resigned as governor after winning the presidential election of 1884. He was the first Democrat to be elected president after the Civil War and the only president to return to the White House for a non-consecutive second term. David B. Hill was the 29th governor, and as a former mayor of Elmira, Hill was qualified to step into the role of chief executive. During his governorship, Hill reformed child labor laws, supported the rights of labor unions, and lobbied for a state forest preserve. The state's economy flourished under his leadership. Hill was elected to the United States Senate for a term beginning in early 1891 and served as a senator and governor for almost a year. Roswell P. Flower, the 30th governor, was born in Jefferson County. When Henry Keep, former president of the New York Central Railroad, asked Flower to manage his estate, he moved to New York City and established himself there as a keen financial administrator. He began his political career by serving 3 terms in the United States House of Representatives. As governor, Flower signed into law the bills creating the Adirondack Park and the city of Niagara Falls. Having signed a constitutional amendment changing the governor's term from 3 years to 2, Flower was the last governor to serve a 3-year term. Levi P. Morton was the 31st governor, and he served in the United States House of Representatives before his appointment as minister to France. Serving in this capacity, he accepted the Statue of Liberty from the French on July 4th in 1884 and was elected vice president as Benjamin Harrison's ticket in 1888. As governor, he advocated for a state highway construction program as well as the civil service reform. In 1886, President Grover Cleveland dedicates the Statue of Liberty, a gift to the United States from France. In 1886, Samuel Gompers, a cigar maker in Manhattan, helps found and is the first president of the American Federation of Labor. In 1892, Ellis Island opens, processing approximately 17 million immigrants to the U.S. before its closure in 1954. In 1892, Rochester's Eastman Dry Plate Company is reorganized as Eastman Kodak Company, and General Electric is founded in Schenectady, New York. In 1894, Forever Wild preserves protecting 3 million acres of the Adirondacks and Catskills from logging and development. In 1898, the Children's AIDS Society establishes the first day school in New York for disabled children. Frank S. Black is the 32nd governor, and he entered politics following a law career in Troy. He developed a solid reputation after successfully prosecuting a high-profile murder case and was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 1894. After serving 1 term, he was nominated to run for governor and won by a large majority. He urged the completion of the state capitol, lobbied for election reform, endorsed the Spanish-American War, and made improvements to the Erie Canal. Theodore Roosevelt, a lifelong public servant, served as a state assembly member, United States Civil Service Commissioner, president of the New York Board of Police Commissioners, and assistant secretary of the Navy. As the leader of the Rough Riders, Roosevelt became a national hero during the Spanish-American War. As governor, he improved labor laws, outlawed racial segregation in public schools, and advanced park and forestry programs. In 1900, he was elected vice president under William McKinley. Roosevelt became president after McKinley's assassination in 1901 and was reelected independently 3 years later. Benjamin B. Odell Jr. was the 34th governor of New York and was an ice dealer in Newburgh. He was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 1894, and Odell consolidated overlapping state agencies, backed tenement house reform, and secured further funding for the Erie Canal. Frank W. Higgins was the 35th governor, and he began his political career serving for 8 years in the state senate, beginning in 1893. He was lieutenant governor under Benjamin Odell before becoming governor with the support of President Roosevelt, and throughout his administration, Higgins supported smaller government and lower taxes. He left the office with an $11 million surplus in the state treasury. Higgins died just 6 weeks after completing his term. In 1898, New York City is consolidated as a city with 5 boroughs. In 1898, the USS Maine is destroyed in Havana, starting the Spanish-American War. Nearly 30,000 New Yorkers fight in the victorious U.S. Army. 1899, the present state capitol is completed, having taken 32 years and $25 million to build. In 1900, the first electric bus becomes operational in New York City. In 01, the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo promotes trade and relationships between the Americas. President McKinley is assassinated on site. In that same year, New York becomes the first state to require motor vehicle license plates. In 1903, Pierce Arrow begins manufacturing luxury automobiles in Buffalo. In 1903, Lackawanna Iron and Steel Company begins production in Erie County. In 1904, New York City's first subway opens between Lower Manhattan and the Bronx, spurring residential construction in its service areas. In 1904, the General Slocum disaster claims the lives of 1,300 New Yorkers on the East River, and then the largest peacetime disaster in U.S. history. In 1905, W.B. Du Bois founds the Niagara Movement in Buffalo to forward African-American civil equality. In 1907, the tradition of dropping a brightly lit ball at midnight on New Year's Eve in Times Square begins. In that same year, New York's Public Service Commission is created to regulate utility services statewide. Charles Evan Hughes is the 36th governor, and he defeated newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst in the 1906 gubernatorial election. Governor Hughes secured the authority to initiate investigations of executive agencies through a public service commission. He resigned to accept an appointment to the United States Supreme Court by Taft, which he resigned to run for president in 1916, ultimately losing to Woodrow Wilson. He later served as Secretary of the State to the Presidents Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge. Horace White is the 37th governor. A native of Buffalo, he represented Onondaga County in the state senate from 1896 to 1908. As lieutenant governor, he assumed the duties of governor for just 86 days, and between Governor Hughes' resignation and the inauguration of John Dix. He was not nominated for election and returned to Syracuse to practice law. John Alden Dix was the Democratic Party chairman when he successfully sought the governorship in 1910. As governor, he created the State Conservation Commission, approved legislation authorizing direct primary elections, and improved state highways. Following the deadly Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911, Dix helped pass the 1 day of the rest in 7 law that limited the number of working hours for women and children and improved working conditions in factories. William Sulzer was the 39th governor and was the first and only governor to be impeached. Prior to taking office, Sulzer served in the state assembly for 8 terms in the United States House of Representatives. Elected governor with the support of Tammany Hall, he angered his leader, Charles F. Murphy, when he distanced himself from Tammany's influence and supported primary elections. With Tammany's encouragement, the state assembly voted to impeach Sulzer on October 17, 1913, and convicted by a special court, Sulzman returned to New York City, but a month later was again elected to the state assembly. In 1907, J.P. Morgan stabilizes the panic in New York City banks to avert a national economic disaster. In 1909, the NAACP is founded in New York City by 53 black and white leaders. In 1910, the Pennsylvania Station, or Penn Station in New York City, begins full service to Long Island and New Jersey. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire results in the deaths of 146 garment workers, mostly young immigrant women, in New York City. In 1911, the first transcontinental airline flight begins its journey in New York and lands in Pasadena, California, after 82 hours in flight. In 1911, a fire in the New York City Capitol ravages the State Library and State Museum, destroying 450,000 books and 270,000 manuscripts. In that same year, New York State creates the Factory Investigating Committee to improve conditions for factory workers, and also the Computing Tabulating Company, which is the predecessor of IBM, is formed in Endicott, Broome County. In 1912, the RMS Titanic sinks on its maiden voyage from England to New York City, and the RMS Carpathia docks at New York's Pier 54 with its survivors. In 1913, the Grand Central Terminal opens in Manhattan, replacing Cornelius Vanderbilt's Grand Central Depot. In that same year, the International Exhibition of Modern Art in New York City, known as the Armory Show, introduces modern art to the U.S. In 1913, the Woolworth Building opens in New York City as the world's tallest building. The next year, the Panama Canal, begun during President Roosevelt's administration, opens after 10 years of construction and links the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In 1914, World War I breaks out in Europe, and New York's industry shifts to war production. Martin H. Glynn is the 40th governor of New York, and as a journalist and eventually owner and the editor of the Albany Times-Union, he served the United States House of Representatives as a state comptroller. He became governor upon the conviction of William Sulzer, and while the outcome of the impeachment remained in dispute, both men claimed to be governor. During his term, the statewide direct primary law was enacted and a workers' compensation bill was authorized and taxes decreased. Charles S. Whitman was the 41st governor and was appointed Deputy Attorney General to investigate election fraud. He was later elected District Attorney of New York County. As governor, he mobilized men and finances during World War I, and during his term, New York State Police were organized, women achieved the right to vote, and the Prohibition Amendment was ratified. He later served as commander of the Port Authority of New York and president of the American Bar Association. Alfred E. Smith was the 42nd governor, and before becoming governor, he served in the Assembly for 12 years and led the body as Speaker. Combining grand vision with a streetwise popular touch, Smith made sweeping changes to the organization of state government. As a social reformer, he expanded support for housing, healthcare, and parks, and he increased education budgets. Smith was the Democratic candidate for president in 1928 and the first Catholic nominated by a major political party, but was defeated by Herbert Hoover. Later, he served as the president of the Empire State Incorporated, which constructed and operated the Empire State Building. Nathan L. Miller was the 43rd governor of New York and served as state comptroller, a justice of the state Supreme Court, and as a justice of the State Court of Appeals. He defeated Smith in his bid for re-election in 1920. A staunch conservative, Miller was in favor of the death penalty, suspicious of women voters, and skeptical of reforms put in place by his predecessor. He established a motion picture censorship commission of New York City Transit Commission and promoted water power development. He's credited with instituting policies that saved taxpayers $20 million. In 1915, preparedness advocates began officer training in Plattsburgh, New York, which is the forerunner of the U.S. Army's ROTC program. In 1917, the U.S. fights in World War I until armistice in 1918, and over 360,000 New Yorkers serve. In 1917, women gained the right to vote in New York 3 years before the 19th Amendment. In 1917, Harlem attorney Edward A. Johnson, who was born into slavery in North Carolina, becomes the first African-American elected to the state assembly. In 1918, the Erie Barge Canal opens, enabling 20th century use of the historic waterway. In 1919, Ida Sammis from Suffolk County and Mary Lilly from New York City become the first women elected to the state assembly. In 1920, the Harlem Renaissance creates a forum for African American cultural expressions between the two world wars. In 1920, unknown perpetrators bombed the New York Stock Exchange, killing 33 people and injuring more than 400. In 1921, Schenectady's WGY becomes the New York's first commercial radio station. In 1923, Yankee Stadium opens in the Bronx. In 1924, Robert Moses defines park development as a legitimate function of the state government and drives the creation of the New York State Park System. In 1929, the New York stock market crashes and the Great Depression begins. Franklin D. Roosevelt is the 44th governor. He began his storied political career in the New York State Senate. During World War I, he served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy and suffered through and overcame a disabling bout of polio. Assuming the governorship at the onset of the Great Depression, Roosevelt devoted himself to relieving the burden on New Yorkers. He advocated for a federal old age pension and created the Temporary Relief Administration to provide assistance to the unemployed. Elected president in 1932, he's the only man in history to win 4 terms to the White House, where he led the country back to the economic health and to victory in World War II. Herbert H. Lehman proved to be an able and long-serving governor, helping to steer New York through the Great Depression. Lehman modeled state relief programs, and after President Roosevelt's National New Deal, known as the Little New Deal, these programs set a minimum wage, provided public housing, and increased unemployment insurance. It was later during Lehman's tenure that the term for governor was lengthened to 4 years. Lehman resigned to become the first Director General of the United States Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. Charles Paletti was the 46th governor, and he served as counsel to Governor Lehman, who appointed him as the Justice of the New York Supreme Court in 1937, a seat to which he was later elected for a 14-year term. He interrupted his term to serve as Lehman's lieutenant governor, and upon Lehman's resignation, Paletti became the first Italian-American governor in the United States, but served for only 29 days, the shortest tenure of any governor of New York. After leaving Albany, Paletti played a major role in the United States Army and the reconstruction of Italy after World War II. Thomas E. Dewey is next. He first attracted national attention as a special prosecutor of organized crime in New York City during the 1930s, and he was a popular governor who signed the Eves-Quinn Bill banning racial and religious discrimination in employment, the first of its kind in the United States. He helped to establish the state university system and the New York State Thruway, and he increased unemployment and disability benefits, and was nominated for president in 1944 and 1948. The Republican Dewey lost to Franklin Roosevelt and then Harry Truman. In 1931, the Empire State Building opens as the tallest building in the U.S. In 1931, New York is the first state to legislate unemployment relief. In 1932, the first Winter Olympics ever is held in the U.S. and is hosted at Lake Placid. And in the next year, the New York State Labor Commissioner Frances Perkins becomes the first woman cabinet officer when appointed the U.S. Secretary of Labor. In 1937, Oscar Garcia Rivera, a Republican from the East Harlem, becomes the first Latino elected to the state assembly. And in 1940, Governor Lehman creates the New York State Defense Council to prepare for the state of war. In 1941, the U.S. enters World War II after Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, and New York leads all states in defense production and enlistment in the armed forces. In 1945, World War II ends, and over 27,000 New Yorkers have lost their lives. In 1945, New York passes an anti-discrimination legislation after wartime labor shortages highlight discriminatory practices. In 1947, Arthur Levitt and Sons begin the construction of the Levittown on Long Island, and it becomes an icon of post-war suburban development in the U.S. In 1947, Jackie Robinson stars for the Brooklyn Dodgers and integrates Major League Baseball. In 1948, the State University of New York SUNY system is established. In 1950, U.S. troops join in the Korean War, and New York loses 2,379 members of the armed forces before the 1953 ceasefire. In 1952, the United States headquarters opens on 17 acres in Manhattan. Next, we have Averell Harriman, who's shown here with his dog Broom, began a long and distinguished political career in 1933, working at President Roosevelt's National Recovery Administration, and ultimately served under 5 Democratic presidents. Before he was governor, Harriman was both ambassador to the Soviet Union and United States Secretary of Commerce. As governor, his socially progressive agenda included advancement in consumer protection and services for the mentally ill and elderly. He continued his career at the international diplomacy as ambassador at large under JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson, and numerous other posts. Nelson A. Rockefeller was the 49th governor and was elected governor 4 times before being appointed vice president by Ford after Nixon resigned. As governor, he expanded the State University of New York into the largest public education system in the world. He also expanded the state parks and highway systems and created the Council on the Arts. Governor Rockefeller proposed the first statewide minimum wage law in the country and appointed an unprecedented number of women to head state agencies. He oversaw massive building projects, including the Empire State Plaza, Lincoln Center, and the World Trade Center. Malcolm Wilson was the 50th governor, and he held state elective office for 36 consecutive years. First elected to the state assembly in 1938, he introduced 432 bills that were signed into law, including the creation of the Higher Education Assistance Corporation. Wilson served as Nelson Rockefeller's lieutenant governor from 59 to 73, where his relationships with members of the legislature made him an invaluable asset to the administration. Hugh L. Carey was the 51st governor and serving his 7th term in the United States House of Representatives. when he was elected governor, his ability to build coalitions of disparate groups was a foundation for his success in restoring the fiscal integrity of New York City and state during the financial crisis of the late 70s. His reforms included reducing public spending, creating unprecedented oversight panels, and imposing balanced budgets. He oversaw the groundbreaking of the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center and the building of the Battery Park City and South Street Seaport. Governor Carey inaugurated an I Love New York campaign and established the Empire State Games. In 1956, the New York State Thruway opens, linking 7 of the state's largest cities. In 1968, Shirley Chisholm becomes the first African-American woman elected to the U.S. Congress, representing New York's 12th District. In 1969, the Woodstock Music and Arts Festival, held in Bethel, Sullivan County, celebrates the counterculture of the 1960s. In 1969, the Stonewall riots in Greenwich Village marked the beginning of the modern gay rights movement in the U.S. In 1970, the World Trade Center opens to the public, and its twin towers become the world's tallest building until Chicago's Sears Tower is built in 1973. In 1975, the Vietnam War ends at a cost of more than 4,000 New York lives. In 1975, New York City avoids bankruptcy through decisive action by governor and legislature. In 1980, Lake Placid hosts the Winter Olympics for a second time. In 1981, television channel MTV is launched in New York City. In 1984, Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro of Queens becomes the first woman to be nominated for U.S. Vice President on a major party ticket. In 1989, David Dinkins is elected mayor of New York City and becomes the city's first African-American mayor. Mario M. Cuomo, a Queens native, served 3 terms as governor after serving as lieutenant governor and secretary of the state. He was a progressive governor who believed in the power of the government to improve people's lives while taking a pragmatic approach to fiscal issues. During his tax tenure, Cuomo dramatically lowered tax income rates and made large investments in public education, infrastructure, transportation, and public safety. He's a steadfast opponent of the death penalty, and he vetoed the death penalty 12 times. Regarded as one of the nation's most gifted orators, he began to voice nationally on issues ranging from the role of religion in public life to expanding opportunity for all. George E. Pataki was the 53rd governor, and he served as mayor of the Peekskill as well as a member of the New York State Assembly and Senate before serving 3 terms as governor. He advocated for a small government, private sector job creation, and tax cuts. He made the environment and open space preservation a top priority of his administration, protecting over 1 million acres of open space and advocating for renewable energy and environmental conservation policies. He was governor on September 11, 2001, when terrorists attacked the World Trade Center buildings. David A. Patterson was the 55th governor, and he was New York's first African-American to serve as governor. Additionally, he was the state's first blind chief executive, a graduate of Columbia University and Hofstra University Law School. He served the New York State Senate from 1985 to 2007. Eventually rising to the rank of minority leader. As a senator, he helped the African burial ground become a national monument. In 2006, he was elected lieutenant governor and became governor in 2008. As governor, he set a precedent and settled years of legal dispute by appointing a lieutenant governor. During his time in office, New York and the rest of the nation suffered through the worst recession since the Great Depression. In response, he amended budget extender legislation to limit the late budgets and help guide the state through its crisis. In 1990 to 91, Iraqi invasion of Kuwait prompts the Persian Gulf War. Over 2,000 New Yorkers were activated with 16 recorded casualties. In 1993, terrorists bombed the North Tower of the World Trade Center, killing 6 people. In 1993, H. Carl McCall, appointed state comptroller, becomes the first African-American to hold statewide office. A year later, he's elected a full term. In 2001, nearly 3,000 people died when the terrorists destroyed the World Trade Center. In 2001, the U.S. begins a war on terror in Afghanistan. Soldiers from Fort Drum's 10th Mountain Division are among the first ground troops deployed. In 2008, David Patterson becomes the New York's first African-American governor, and 2011, New York grants marriage equality for all citizens. So thank you for watching this video on the Hall of Governors in the state capitol of building of Albany. I hope you get a chance to visit. It's a wonderful place, and there's a lot of other things to see. And check out some of my other tour videos, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great day.